Welcome YouTubers, this is Necro Arcanist X Triple I bringing you the next chapter in Book 1 of the Crusade Chronicles, Hell's Crusade. If you have not yet watched chapters 1 or 2, then do so now to avoid spoilers. Episode 3, titled Truth Stranger Than Fiction, will be less action-packed and more educational. Education being less maths and science and more background on the overall plot behind Hell's Crusade. But that's all I'm going to say about it. At the end of this chapter, I will detail what inspired the designs for some of my characters, namely Raziel, Dante, Vincent, Adele, and Saberfang, so sit back and enjoy. Previously on Hell's Crusade, while rescuing Luke, aka Bob, from sudden death by electric chair in an all-out mission upon a maximum security Davenport prison, John was impaled through the abdomen by a large piece of shrapnel, and in his wounded fury annihilated oncoming enemy hordes with demonic magic. Having promised to explain to cousin Brian the nature of his supernatural prowess, John's sons, daughter, and family pet were quick to return him and to rescue Luke back to Queenstown, and they had apparently managed to take him inside just in time for his consciousness to begin to slip. The group tossed John onto the coffee table in the lounge room, which creaked from the sudden weight. "What the hell have you been eating there, mate?" asked Luke. "Chicken," replied John groggily. "The whole fucking poultry farm's worth." "That's the idea. Think I can see you in there." Adele searched nearby cupboards frantically and found a medicine cabinet. "Don't tell me you gotta put a band-aid on it and kiss no better," said Luke. Adele turned to him and said,
"You have a lot to learn about women."
"I've been telling him that for 32 years, replied John. Adele found a needle and thick thread, and with expert speed and skill she stitched John's wounds together just as he started to pass out. After a few minutes, John finally stood up straight and began feeling around the stitching. "You missed a spot there," he muttered as he managed to find a gap. John reached inside and pulled out a sickly-looking lump. "Well, what do you know?" he said. "My bloody gallbladder got cancerous and that thing cut it off before I lost me liver." Everybody choked in disgust as John swiped at the gap with his fingernail. The thread fell out and there was no trace of the wound, except for an obvious scar. John then took the thread out of Adele's hands and started fixing the hole in his leather armour, which had silk lining the inside to, apparently, prevent the leather's friction from causing blisters. "So," blared Brian loudly enough for everybody to hear, "what's with the child soldiers, the magic, and the talking dog?" Luke stared down at Saberfang, who grinned ear to ear before looking back at Brian. "Guess we'll come clean," said John. "Then against why I called you all out here. Quit stolen." John sighed at Luke and Brian. The incident. Out in the woods? 30 years ago, you remember that? John tapped at the opal gemstone strapped to his chest. "For years ever since I got this thing, I've had some really fucked up dreams. Eventually I did manage to figure it all out, and apparently this gemstone is the crystallized soul of a demon. In the ancient kingdom of Babylon, there was a farmer who, upon realizing that a priest attacked his daughter, retaliated and killed the bastard with a scythe. Townsfolk saw this as treason and had the man executed, but his last words were a curse that the entire kingdom would fall, and the souls of the slain would fuel his transformation in the afterlife. Once the prophecy was fulfilled, the new demon, by the name of Diabolos, returned to Earth in the form of a crystal and became the deity of the ancient Sumerians, who depicted him as a dark angel, despite the fact that his true form was a legless dragon. Anyway, the elder god foretold that the demons would try to destroy God's most prized creations, humans, because the demons were casted out for refusing to bow down to God. Because as angels are bound to God in servitude, humans are given the ability to lead their own paths. Diabolos was eventually defeated by the demons, and the Sumerian kingdom fell. Discouraged at human weakness, he cast himself off into space in the form of a crystalline meteor until the next coming of Judgment Day, where he believed his humanity would have eventually disappeared as he matured as a demon. He would then pick a human host, dubbed his emissary, to give him a body with which to fight the demons. Seeing as this process is parasitic and because parasites tend to get removed, Diabolos offers the host his own powers to use as they fight for freedom and victory. Thing is though, I've had demon spirit essence running for so long in my blood that the power has infected my own genetic structure. This means that when I had children, they all had genetic mutations. Raziel was the firstborn, meaning that he was affected the most, as you can see clearly. He was killed while still in the womb, but he continued to develop alongside his twin brother Dante, who actually developed further while his dead twin struggled to keep up. Dante has superior reflexes, physical speed, and agility, but the only problem is he has an attitude problem. I do not, replied Dante. Let me finish before you make your smart-ass comments. Anyway, when they were actually born, Raziel was declared dead, and the doctor would have disposed of him if it weren't for the fact he opened his eyes, which was kind of funny looking at the doctor's face. I figured out that the magic essence in his blood must have revived him, although it did so at a cost. He was born and undead. He's undead? Shouted Luke. He's a friggin' zombie! Raziel shushed Luke. More like a vampire, he said calmly. Yes, continued John. Raziel was cursed to be a mortal vampire. Blood black as the night sky he depends on. If you actually notice, his right eye turns bloodshot in direct sunlight. Raziel gave a blank stare to allow Luke and Brian to inspect the phenomenon. I end up losing the ability to see colour, contrast and sharpness, said Raziel. My whole body becomes weaker during the day, and that's why I wear this much clothing at all times. What about that freaky eye of yours? Asked Brian. That black left one. The blackened left eye. That's vampire vision. What's vampire vision? Vampires, when stalking prey, or at least that's what I imagine given that I'm one myself, have the ability to locate their victims by detection of breath, heartbeat, smell, brainwave output, and heat emission. But all this data turns into a form of thermal imagery that varies between blue, purple, and black for the environment, and living organisms can turn red like X-rays that only show their blood vessels. This is how I see during the daytime. Because of that, I can't recognize anybody through facial recognition because I'm forced to think through my instincts only. Well, that's a bugger, commented Luke. Really, that's to suck hard. Can't even enjoy the simplest of things normal bloke your age can. Comedy of a TV slapstick routine, fun of a game at a beach with your mates, pretty girls. Luke drifted off into his own mind for a few moments. Sorry, what was I talking about? He finally said. At least some good came out of it, remarked John. Raz is quite intellectually gifted. His IQ actually rivals that of Stephen Hawking. In the hot summer nights when I can't sleep, added Raziel, I usually spend my time learning. I can see clearly in the moonlight, and the lack of sunlight gives me the strength to be active, but given the lack of time I actually spend awake, limits the time I spend exercising. As a result, I develop muscular atrophy. I can get my ass kicked by a lettuce leaf if it takes me by surprise. You got a point there, remarked Brian. Thanks to nuclear testing, you can't even eat pea soup anymore, it tries to eat you instead. Luke butted in again. Hang on a minute. If you spend so much time awake, don't you actually get tired? True, said Raziel. I do eventually suffer from physical exhaustion, but I don't need sleep. And I tend to eat raw meat so it has enough blood to keep me going another night. Plus the protein will ease my atrophy. The only problem is, meat is hard to come by when a food ration to the towns of Tasmania just leftovers from the fat cat banquets. In the middle of Raziel's conversation, John spread out his demonic wings and shook them as if to remove dust. What about does? Asked Brian. Did the kids become half-bird? Yes and no, said Raziel. We have developed wings, but we don't use them. Besides, my wings don't have feathers. Raziel allowed two wings, similar to John, as they were bat-like in design, to unravel out from under his scarf. They function, but because the army often keeps an eye out for flying intruders, we haven't had the time to practice unless we leave town for a while. And when we do get spotted, well, Vincent actually wound up on Unsolved Mysteries last year. I think I saw that actually, remarked Luke. Dante and Vincent also spread their wings. Dante had a single pair of feathered wings, black as night, while Vincent had two pairs of wings with grey feathers. One large pair on top and a far smaller pair below. All three of the boys' wings seemed to be wasting away from a lack of use.
It'd be fun to fly, said Vincent, but we get shot at.
John shook his head sadly. Raziel just said that, he said.
Oh.
Yeah, Vincent's a bit slow. He's autistic and has got a genetic defect that gives him his large size and the ability to crash concrete with his bare hands. You should have seen him in kindy. He had to lie on the floor just to reach the table. But ironically, he's the baby of the family, only a year younger than the twins. What about Adele? Asked Brian. If Vincent's only a year younger, he's the youngest, when did you have time to have her as well? Yeah, added Luke. Identical twins and a separate daughter. impossible in 12 months,
That's because I'm adopted.
replied Adele. What?
It's true. I was about 5 years old at the time.
John immediately took over the story. You remember them girls from our class, Bob? The ones who wanted to be witches? Well, one of them had a boyfriend and he got kidnapped. I was tracking him for a fair while before I had the boys, but years went by and the girls eventually moved on, despite missing the warlock of their coven. But I never fail a mission, especially when it involves my friends. I was stalking the woods near here just after Vincent turned 5, and I heard 2 people arguing in the woods and decided to check it out. From what I heard and saw, it turns out that the kidnapper was a demoness, a succubus mind you, who took an archangel in hiding to sire her kids. Her plan was to sacrifice them to a master or some stupid shit like that, but apparently the angel took none of it and he took Adele and her little sister to safety. I tried to follow, but he was just too fast for me to catch up. And at that time, Raziel had tracked me down through the forest just to dob on Dante because he ate Vincent's leftover birthday cake when he wasn't looking. Did manage to drag the pair along as well. As I went to tell him to go home, she ran past me and killed her husband. I had to intervene, but all she did was take Adele's sister and run away, leaving Adele behind. I had no choice really. I couldn't leave her in the woods to die. So I gave her father a burial and brought her home. And I kept his sword too, which was ironically also his epitaph. But I kept it clean and I was going to pass it on to Adele last year, but I must have forgotten about it till now. John opened a nearby, well-hidden weapons cabinet in the wall and pulled out a crystal sword, which had 2 long blades and a semicircular handle. The texture was like that of bright blue crystal with far darker blue veins crisscrossing the entire surface. Along the handle in mystic runes was inscribed the name Sacred Hymn. John tossed the blade in motion so that he could grab the blades and point the handle at Adele, who hesitatingly reached out and held it.
It's a little bit heavy.
She said. I thought so, replied John, as he took the blade back from Adele and mounted it on the wall. Still, I raised it like one of my own, he said, despite the fact she's got a few personal differences. Personal differences? Asked Brian and Luke in unison, before they turned and pointed at each other with moronic grins on their faces. Basically, she's got both angel and demon blood running through her veins, so she's picked up a few traits from her parents. Adele revealed a brilliant pair of angel wings with feathers that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. Her angelic calf grants her powers of healing, said John. As you just saw, when I got impaled, she managed to stitch it back together. That string she used was enchanted by her to bind broken flesh. I don't really know what to expect from her because her mother's a succubus demon, but she's been pretty easy to deal with, unlike Dante. Hey, exclaimed Dante. Pipe down, boy. Anyway, I did research on mythical hybrids at one point. According to what I found, any hybrid between angels, demons, or humans were regarded as Nephilim by ancient priests. They were highly respected wherever they went. However, they were especially vulnerable to demon attacks. Therefore, it was important to keep Adele here to protect her, among other things.
Yeah, I'm leaving,
said Adele, as she waltzed out of the room hastily and went to her bedroom. She doesn't like to talk about. About what? Asked Luke. You'll find out eventually, let's just leave it at that. So what does all this magic shit have to do with us? Asked Brian. John squatted over the ground and scratched his ankle. Well, to put it bluntly, I've learned that I'm capable of passing on a small fraction of my power onto somebody else. If Diabolos has the power to entrap his own soul, I can break off a shard of his power and fashion it into a smaller version but with a mere fraction of the power. You've seen this in Saberfang, who hails from a tribe of werewolves in the Russian Mount Ortorten. He carries a shard of the opal and therefore a part of my power. Saberfang tilted his head to reveal that, amidst a thick layer of bluish-grey fur, a sapphire earring hung from the hole in his right ear. It seems the opal itself decides what powers are passed on, and I've estimated that it for the power to control ice would befit a Russian werewolf. Luke thought carefully before he made his next statement. So I'm guessing Raziel has a fancy gemstone as well. Raziel nodded and carefully lifted his scarf to show a necklace with an obsidian pendant. The proper term for a gem that contains a soul is called an arcana, said John. These accessories are just for show, and the true crystal souls are in fact fused with our hearts. It seems that all living creatures have the capability to use magic, and these gems are just tools that draw out and amplify our ability to use it. Not only that, what we see as magic is actually manipulation of the scientifically hypothesized dark energy that's said to make up 2/3 of our universe. Spooky, replied Luke. Raziel and Fang are the only ones with Arcana besides me, added John. So, asked Brian, judging from Raz's capability on a battlefield, he can manipulate darkness. Correct, he is a vampire, son of night, no doubt a good candidate for umbramancy. So if you was to pass some power onto, say, Adele, she could gain some sort of holy based magic because she's half angel. Maybe, but I've never tried it with her or the other two boys, but I'm gonna have to. This brings us back to the original topic, why you are here. Hands up, who thinks the Emperor of Australia can kiss his own ass and fuck off back to the US? Everybody, even Saberfang, raised both arms to try and double the number of counts.
You can't see it, but I'm holding my hands up.
Called out Adele. Then why don't you come out? Asked Dante.
I had an itch, now I have to fix my hair.
I understand, replied Dante. Vincent chuckled to himself.
No surprise there.
He said. Everybody started laughing, apart from Dante. Anyway, continued John, I want to bring that all down. This can't be any different from the bases I took down in the military. You were in the military? Asked Luke. Yeah, I was a soldier in World War III, and I participated in a battle that brought down the Taliban once and for all. Bloody hiding now. Last year, I was hired by American President Obama and the Queen of Britain on numerous occasions just to sabotage the Korean dictatorship. And while I was in the States, I hired myself to steal the original recipe for KFC. It was from the Pentagon. The Pentagon? Stammered Brian. Seriously, the Pentagon. What was a chicken recipe doing in the Pentagon? Well, it turns out that a few ingredients were brought by aliens as a peace offering, and they promote physical health and provide immunity to disease. But they were reverse engineered by scientists to slowly kill humans via an addictive excess consumption, and the age of obesity had begun. I pinched some of the original unmodified stuff. Most of it's plant-based and it grows fairly quickly. I hide it in the basement and I use it whenever I'm cooking meat, but it tastes disgusting on anything else though. Pretty sneaky, eh? Commented Luke. If we could get in and out of the country easily, said John, I could probably cure famine in Africa or some shit like that with us. Anyway, back off topic. If we could gather a small force of vigilantes, each with a power from this little opal here, we would have enough power to take down the military occupying all of Tasmania in a matter of months. Where the hell are we going to get enough guys to make a vigilante group? Asked Luke. Well, I've been trying to contact all our old friends, but to no avail. Most of them got killed during the last two wars, and a few left have gone into hiding. Most of them skipped country just to avoid the Empire. It's like Star Wars all over again. Sadly, the same also happened with my family members over the years, so our options are kind of limited. Is there anything we can do? Asked Brian. Well, I've been using my mercenary connections to the higher-end government facilities in our former allied nations, just to locate a few people. I did manage to find one guy and he's currently on a mission for the CIA, Washington branch. When he returns though, his co-workers are going to pass on the message and we'll have some results. At that point, a phone started to ring. Everybody pulled a mobile phone out of their pockets, but John's was the one ringing, so he put it on speakerphone. On the other line came a male voice. I hear you've been looking for me, he said. Well, what's up, Jackie Chan? It's been a while. 23 years. We sure left them Taliban super soldiers, eh? Shockingly, good surprise. Yeah, I remember the size of that explosion we made short-circuiting the power plants. Listen, mate, I know you're in the CIA, so I'm asking you for a favour. I want to try and reunite the class of 14 and plan for a covert resistance operation. You sure about that? It'll be hard, and I can't do it here. There's spies everywhere and I can't tell whether or not they're ours anymore. Can you get into the country at all? I'm connecting to you via personal CIA satellite relays. I can track your locations and infiltrate within the hour. Cool. Meet you here, Jack. John hung up. Phase 1 has begun, he said cockily. What are we going to do until Jack gets here? Asked Brian. Well, I was going to renovate the house. If we're going to keep a resistance base here, then we're going to need the room to keep them all. Adele's not keen on sharing space with the boys, and those three don't have enough space as it is in their room. John quickly took a pen and started drawing up plans for a new house on the coffee table. You can't just build a house in one night, exclaimed Luke. I rebuilt this house after the previous owner burned it down, replied John. With enough scrap materials, I can triple the size and make it like a mansion or something. You serious? Seriously. Thing is though, at that moment everybody heard knocking at the door. John walked out to the front door and found a flaming bag sitting on the doorstep. He looked up and noticed two figures in the distance running away as fast as they could. John took his scythe and swung it like a golf club, sending the flaming bag flying, and once it hit the two figures, they were set ablaze. John walked back into the lounge room. The doorbell suddenly rang again, and Adele's footsteps could be heard running towards the door. A voice could be heard saying, "Howdy, ma'am, is your father home?" John sighed and marched towards the door, shouting, "For the last time, I do not want to join the global church of Elvis impersonators." John suddenly caught sight of a suave, tuxedo-wearing man with small brown spikes for hair. He held a suitcase in one hand, and with the other hand he pressed his sunglasses down his nose so his eyes were visible over the top of them. "Somebody call for an agent?" he asked. "How the hell did you get here so fast?" replied John. "You believe it or not, I was already flying over Darwin in my jet when I received a call saying you were looking for me. So I looked you up and I skydived down and landed just outside the door. And that's why I'm the best." "Nice. Come on in, I've already got Luke and Brian here." Two men entered the house while Adele returned to her room. "Nice place here," said Jack. "You really made a name for yourself, mate." "I was going to tear it down and rebuild. If you've got some fancy tech to speed it up, it'll help. I was going to say this ain't a large enough location for a discrete resistance base, but if you plan to remodel, I'm a skilled architect." "I'm a skilled carpenter," replied John. "I'm like Jesus. I got sandals, but my beard's not big enough."
You got a beard.
asked Vincent. "Just a goatee," replied John.
You never take off mask. It's creepy.
"Well, the light makes my eyes hurt, and the mask absorbs a lot of light from around my eyes, so I just got used to wearing it all the time. I actually feel pretty naked without it, to tell you the truth." John showed Jack his plans for his mansion and gathered everybody else around to look. "The layout is basically the same as it is now," he said, "but I'm going to add or modify some spaces to occupy a large group of people at once." "How so?" asked Luke. "Well, I can't really do much until we figure out just how many people we can get to join us," replied John. "But once that's over, the new house is going to have guest rooms available for everyone. My original idea is separate rooms for every individual person, but if resources are lacking, then Plan B consists of 2 large, separate shared rooms for each gender. Of course, the kids and I are still going to have our own separate bedrooms." Adele appeared from out of nowhere to place her opinion.
I wouldn't mind having a shared room.
She said.
It'll be like a big sleepover.
"Even so," replied John, "we're going to have to find out who's out there and who's willing to strike back at the Empire, who took everything away from them. That's where Jack comes in." Jack placed his briefcase on the table and opened it to reveal a hidden high-tech computer. "Well, that's pretty impressive," commented Luke. "I can use this to trace every person by name alone," said Jack. "Beforehand, I should rule out those no longer with us." John nodded. "What's the point of asking them to join us if they were already killed by the war?" he said. Jack began typing on the keyboard and several details came up on screen. "All this is doing is analysing the government immigration files of every city in the world in alphabetical order of names in largest to smallest cities of largest to smallest countries." Within a minute, 3 results already appeared and John began to study them. "I've got a few contacts myself," he said, "but the network security here will find us out immediately if I notify them what we're doing." "That's why I'm using the CIA's private network," said Jack. "I'll send them an invite on local forums within their current location. But what shall we say on it?" John pushed Jack aside and began typing. "You are formally invited to rebel against the Australian Empire. Members of the Mountain Heights class of 2014 welcome." John clicked the button to send the email and started waiting for a response. After about 10 minutes, several answers had been given, but everybody declined. The last response was, "Are you crazy? Who is this?" John replied with, "The one with the best entrance to the leavers dinner." Immediately, everybody on the forum acted surprised, saying things such as, "I thought you died in the war," and "Where'd you go, mate? I haven't seen you for years." Dante nudged John in the back. "What's the leavers dinner and how did you enter it?" "Well, it's just this thing at the end of the year where the year 6s and 10s had this big fancy dinner. Just to pretty much gloat that they were moving up in the world. I asked the local biker gang at the time to escort my uncle's Commodore, and I had a little pyrotechnics on the side just to make it flashy when I jumped out the door. The only problem is the only other proper entrance was that the cops dropped somebody off in handcuffs, so I didn't have that much competition, sadly." John went back to the forums and explained the situation to his friends. They all shared a different reply, but they could all be summed up with the words, "I'd love to help save our country, but there are no flights to Australia anymore." John finished the conversation with, "Jack works at the CIA. He'll pick you guys up to meet us here. Once I have a headcount, I can build us a resistance base and plan out our mission to take down the Empire." John allowed Jack to retrieve his computer, and overhead, a jet plane could be heard, lowering towards the house. "That's my ride, Jack. I'll see you all in 3 weeks." Jack then left the house to catch the plane. And that was chapter 3. So as I said at the start of the video, I said I would explain the character designs for Raziel, Dante, Vincent, Adele, and Saberfang. But first off, I should note the Leavers Dinner. You would have heard the characters talking about it in the first chapter, and this is actually a real thing. At the school I attended, which is what Mountain Heights is in the story, that's the actual name in real life, the Year 6s and Year 10s did in fact hold a fancy dinner in town to celebrate the fact that they are moving on to high school and college respectively. Now I will explain the concept designs. Before I explain the character designs, I should note that pretty much every one of these 5 characters that I'm about to explain all have a connection to Final Fantasy. That is a recurring theme that I wanted to have with them, seeing as Final Fantasy is my most favourite series of all time. And so the first character, Dante, resembles Sephiroth, who is the main villain of Final Fantasy VII, with the long katana and silver hair. His personality is linked to Dante, his namesake from Devil May Cry, as he is an arrogant demon hunter, and in his younger years is somewhat vain. In contrast to this is Raziel, who takes his appearance from Squall Leonhardt, who is the hero of Final Fantasy VIII. His personality is rather dark and brooding, just like Squall, but also parallels with Virgil, who comes from Devil May Cry and is Dante's twin brother, which is what inspired me for 2 boys to be twins. Virgil is also dark and brooding and has a hidden sadistic side. While Virgil does not wield a pair of sickle blades, he does wield a katana called Yamato, as well as the blade Force Edge and the gauntlet Beowulf. Raziel takes his name from the Legacy of Kain series. Raziel is a vampire and he wields a sword called the Soul Reaver, which is also his title. Vincent has the least physical ties to Final Fantasy, apart from his hair, which comes from fan favourite Cloud Strife, the hero of Final Fantasy VII, and his name comes from Vincent Valentine, who is an optional recruitable character in the game. Adele is one of the more complicated characters. She is a Nephilim, half angel and half demon. Her Final Fantasy design comes from Renoa Hartley from Final Fantasy VIII, but her name actually comes from a boss character named Adele. The name actually, like the way it is spelled Adel, is actually a male version of the name, and not like the well-known singer Adele, which has an LE on the end. Originally, like Renoa, I wanted Adele to be rather bubbly and happy and always bouncing around, but she seems rather scared and timid at times because she's afraid of her own powers because she's a sorceress. And in Final Fantasy VIII, sorceresses are always hated on because, well, almost all of them, including the sorceress Adele, were extremely brutal and powerful. And another tie to Renoa is that her weapon, which I've incorrectly labelled as a warglaive, it's technically supposed to be a chakram, or a giant shuriken, which is also known as the ninja star, ties into Renoa's blaster edge, which is a projectile weapon mounted to her wrist, and she can shoot it and will return to her like a boomerang. Adele can control her warglaive with her bracer. As you have seen, it can magically return to her whenever she wants. Now, Saberfang is probably the weirdest character by far if you do not count Adele, as he is a werewolf who hails from Russia. His character ties to Final Fantasy VII's Red 13, otherwise known by his real name, Nanaki. Nanaki is the only survivor of an ancient race that looks somewhat similar between a dog and a cat, and he is exceptionally intelligent as well, being able to master human language. They both tend to fight unarmed. Nanaki's weapon of choice in Final Fantasy VII is actually a enchanted headdress that boosts his physical and magical power, and that's actually what inspired me for Saberfang's Arcana, which is a sapphire, to hang from the hole in his right ear. He has a scar over his eye, which also inspired Saberfang to have some sort of battle wound, which might have something to do with his backstory, which will be explained later as the story develops. On another note, I should say that Luke's concept design actually comes from a cross between, I think, the only two playable Negro characters in all of Final Fantasy, Barrett Wallace and Sars Catroy, who both wield gun-like weapons, only Sars wields a pair of handguns which assemble into a rifle, as well as having a big afro, while Barrett's right arm is replaced with a machine gun. Barrett was inspired by Mr. T, which actually ties into Luke because at the Leavers dinner he said he was going to wear a Mr. T uniform with his date. So yeah. And I also forgot to mention that the idea of Dante having a trench coat actually comes from Snowvilliers, who appears in Final Fantasy XIII with Thars. Barrett comes from number 7. And I thought it would suit Dante because Snow is arrogant and headstrong, like Dante. Anyway, I don't really want to babble on much longer, so yeah. Music used in this track included a piano cover of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, as well as the song's main theme from Final Fantasy VII and Find Your Way from Final Fantasy VIII, which appeared in the first chapter. Next time on Hell's Crusade, one of the 4 children suddenly disappears from an Empire attack, and while the others struggle to find them, a massive monster is roaming through the forests, threatening to crush and devour all that stands in its path. This is Necro Arcanist XIII in association with Bandit 1569, signing off. Stay classy, YouTube.